Kingdom of God or the Republic of God. Welcome and greetings to everyone in India and around the world. Christians for centuries have been used to this expression, the kingdom of God. They've got so sentimentally and piously attached to this expression that they have stopped to think about what it means and what it points to. People don't realize that this expression was coined more than 2000 years ago, and this came into existence in a very specific context of politics, of social order, and culture. It stands to common sense that the formulation of ideas and concepts at any given point in history is almost entirely influenced linguistically by the time or the age or the epoch in which it is done. So, if you formulate something in an age of monarchy, it's quite natural that the expressions, the terminologies, and idioms appropriate to monarchy will be used. Jesus of Nazareth lived in a situation, in a context like that. The local king was Herod, but he ruled Palestine under sufferance from the distant Almighty King, the Caesar, who was stationed in Rome as the head of the sprawling Roman Empire. So the imagination of the people, the common man, was saturated with the images and terminologies of kingship. And Jesus could not have formulated his thoughts anticipating that centuries and centuries later, something like the idea of the republic will be born. And actually, it is not that far away. Rome prided itself on its republican traditions. Uh, the Greek city states, Athens in particular, had embryonic forms of the republican model. But people in Palestine at that time were not aware of this. And Jesus was dealing with the people who were immediately in front of him. And Jesus limited his public ministry geographically within the territory of this very small stretch of land. To that extent, he was amazingly local, geographically very limited. And he was a man of the masses. He was not an academic. He was not part of the religious elite, not a member of the Sanhedrin. He was not part of the ruling elite, the economic elite, so on and so forth. And he had to communicate directly with the common man. And anyone who has attempted popular communication will readily agree that this can be done only in the language, in the imagination of the common man. One of the problems that I faced when I broke into the national print media way back in 1995 was that I was laden with an academic style of writing, and I had to deschool myself or disinfect, if you like, disinfect myself of the heavy pedantic academic style in order to write for the masses, as in the case of a newspaper article. So, from being an academic in the context of higher education, I had to reinvent myself as of the standard of a 10th class student. That was not an easy thing to do, but through very hard and sustained efforts, I managed to do that, and which actually did me a great good because it improved my skill in communicating with common people, the man in the street. And that came very handy when between 1999 and 2004, I became a social and quasi political activist and was addressing the ordinary people, and that too in the language of the local people, namely Hindi. And Hindi has infinite variations. So you go from one region to another. The Hindi that you speak in Rajasthan is not the Hindi that you speak in Haryana. Haryana has its own Haryanvi as a language, but Hindi will pass. So local variations. And had I attempted that task of communicating with the common man, fresh from the academic domain, I would have been a terrible flop. But the fact that I had to struggle hard and cultivate the art of communicating with people outside the academia came in very handy later on when I undertook this particular mission of being a wandering, roving, if you like, peripatetic, that's a technical word, roaming around, going from place to place, speaker, dealing with social, political, cultural, to some extent also religious issues in several states of North India. It's an experience that I still cherish. So all this enables me to understand why Jesus used certain images, certain phraseologies, certain proverbs or apotums or similes and metaphors. And the kingdom of God is one such metaphor. I'm absolutely sure that if Jesus were to be alive today and undertake his public ministry, he will not use the expression kingdom of God. And in all likelihood, he would use the expression the republic of God. Why do I say this? I say this with all the confidence that I can possibly muster, based on my understanding of the reorientation that Jesus tried to bring about as far as the Judaic religious sensibility is concerned. If you look at what Jesus was doing, in contrast to how the Judaic religion was organized at that time, which was actually on the monarchical principle, and I'll come to that hopefully in a short while, you will find that Jesus was actually, surprise, Jesus was actually democratizing religion. And I repeat, Jesus was democratizing religion. And this is a subject I hope to deal with in a series of videos because it cannot be handled in a single video. So I'm not going to do that in this particular attempt. Please look forward to a series of videos I hope to do, hopefully both in Malayalam and English, on how Jesus reoriented the religiosity that prevailed at his time from the monarchic model to the democratic republican model. So that's for a future occasion. Now, as regards this formulation of the kingdom of God, now even though Jesus used this formulation of the kingdom of God, those of us, and all of us really are in that category, those of us who are familiar with the contents of the four Gospels, we have no problem in recognizing that Jesus did not conduct himself in the format of a traditional king. In fact, if anything, he lived a contrary model. He missed no opportunity in making people realize and feel for themselves that he was not a king in the stereotypical form or flavor of it, but of a very kind hue or taste altogether. He was astonishingly different. In fact, it was hard for them to realize that he was king. Of course, they readily recognized that the power of God was at work in him. But as to Jesus being a king, perhaps that was the last thing that was in the minds of the people, given the way he approached the human realities, the human conditions, so on and so forth. But yet, the formulation of the kingdom of God is there. and we have to therefore look at it. Now, the question I want to discuss with you, and that's the heart of this video, and this is the issue that should concern all of us. What is the consequence if this formulation, namely the kingdom of God, which was all right some 2020 years ago or 2050 years ago, what happens when the same is transplanted into our context, which is not a monarchical context, which is a secular, republican, democratic model or context? What happens? And this is something to which we pay scant attention. And I humbly submit that we should pay enough attention, I would say enough and more attention, on issues of this kind, because they've got very serious practical implications on the ground. So I'm taking up this discussion mainly to demonstrate the importance of having to pay attention to such details, which are not merely a matter of a metaphoric flourish, but of serious implications on the ground regarding our religious life, how it is organized, the kind of mentality that is fostered in us, and the sensibilities that we are made to develop, whether or not we like it. So, now what is the problem here? The problem is, once you hold on to this idea that what Jesus came to establish or unveil upon the earth is the kingdom of God, and that, of course, is repeatedly stated in the gospel. So, if you would be well within your right to say, well, this expression exists and it is actually the heart of the gospel, yes, I readily agree. But the point I'm making, and the point I'll still make and continue to make, is this: that this concept was formulated in a manner that harmonized with the sensibility, the kind of perception, the imagination that prevailed among the people. And Jesus could not have spoken in republican terms at a time when the local people he was addressing didn't have a clue about what republican or secular democratic republic really is. So that's the point I'm making. Now, what happens when this idea of the kingdom of God is transplanted as it is into the context of a socialist, secular, democratic republic? It's a question that every person is bound to address. We have to raise and answer this question, and we have to do it even if it is too late in the day to do so. Better late than never. Now, let me give you an indication of the whole set of problems that this practice actually introduces and perpetuates. Now, when you say the kingdom of God, what actually sticks in popular imagination is the idea of kingdom, not of God. Kingdom. Because they have an idea about kingdom. They have no idea of the kingdom of God, believe you me. Because we have done very little to explain and make people understand what the kingdom of God really is and how it is different to the kingdoms of men in the world. So, kingdom. Now, the first thing is this: Jesus came to establish the kingdom of God upon the earth. Fine. We are all made to repeat it. We are all obliged to believe it. We are not allowed to change the verbal formulation of it even to a small extent. So Jesus came to establish the kingdom of God upon the earth. Point number two, or argument number two: the church is the contemporary visible manifestation of the kingdom of God. Please understand. On what basis this assumption is arrived at and foisted on the people, I have no idea. But this is the dogmatic assumption that the kingdom of God is manifested through the church. That's the main reason why the Catholic Church insisted for centuries that there is no salvation outside the church, because salvation is within the kingdom of God, church is the kingdom of God, and therefore, syllogistically speaking, There is no salvation outside the church. And mercifully, the present Pope, Pope Francis, has clarified that that's wrong. There is salvation outside the church. And this is something that the Catholics in particular are finding it very hard to stomach. But that's their problem. I don't want to waste our time on it. Let them fight it out themselves. And the Catholics are much better as fighters than all other branches of Christianity, historically and also in contemporary terms. So, you start with the assumption that Jesus came to establish the kingdom of God on earth. The second proposition, the church is the kingdom of God. The third proposition is, and therefore, the supreme leaders of the church are kings and monarchs. That's a problem. That's precisely the problem. So, the Pope is the supreme king. And you know from European history that for several centuries the Pope was the mightiest king in Europe. He had standing army. His writ ran through much of Europe. It came to be increasingly resisted, as for example, Henry VIII in England, because he wanted to divorce his wife and marry somebody else. He said goodbye to Rome, Bishop of Rome, so on and so forth. That is the beginning of Reformation, or the birth of the Protestant Church in England. The birth of the Protestant Church in England, or what's called the Anglican Church, is in infamy. Uh, it's because the king wanted to have more and more of entertainment. There's no theological base for it. Of course, subsequently, theological foundations have been laboriously created and propagated. That's another issue. So, Church of England. Now, if the kingdom of God is equated with the church, then bishops, archbishops, popes, cardinals, etc., they have every right to pass off as kings, and that's precisely what they are doing. If you look at the bishops, the archbishops, major archbishops, cardinals, and ultimately the Pope, and of course these minor bishops that are aplenty in various other denominations, small bishops, kuti bishops, if you like, they are also kings. So what do? They don't instruct people, they issue decrees, kalpana in Malayalam, kalpana. They don't come and sit in a chair, they come and ascend their throne. And that's exactly how it is put even today. Believe you me, people who are not Malayalis, and especially people who are not Christians outside Kerala, would find it incredible that it is so, but that is really how it is. The words, the terminologies that Christians are bound to use in this democratic age are all redolent of or reminiscent of the age of monarchy. So the kings are all dead and gone in politics, in secular life, but the religious life abounds in these kings. Now, for example, the word basilica. The word basilica is derived from Basilios. Basilios is a king. So the church in which Basilios or the king worships is Basilica. So St. Peter's Basilica. In Kerala, there are several basilicas, right? So you understand why. And the kind of language that the bishops use and is used about the bishops, they all go back to the age of monarchy. The arrangement, the administrative structure, the culture within the church. For example, now with that I'll close, so because I don't want to lengthen this presentation any further than I already have. Now think of the status of the people. In a monarchy, the king is sovereign. Sovereign means the will of a person above which there is nothing else. Ultimate will is sovereign. That's the correct meaning of the idea of the sovereign. In the monarchy, the king is sovereign. In England, there is still a king. but he is not sovereign. I don't know how many of you know this. The English king is not sovereign, he is king. The sovereign power is vested with the parliament. Parliament. Now, this distinction was actually created, as you will expect, by the French Revolution. Right until the time of the French Revolution in 1789, the American War of Independence was 1783, and the French Revolution was inspired to a great extent by the American War of Independence. So, French Revolution 1789. It was the French Revolution that effected a contrast, a very significant historical and meaningful contrast between the king and the sovereign. Before the revolution, the king also was sovereign. But after the revolution, the king remained king. So we have kings after the French Revolution. But the parliament became sovereign. But unfortunately, when it comes to the religious kingdom, which kingdoms will still flourish in various parts of the world, as also in Kerala, the kings are absolute. Because, particularly in the Catholic Church, the king combines, and the bishop combines in himself the functions of the king, the parliament, and the judiciary. King as the executive, parliament as the judiciary, and the executive because the judicial functions are also with him. There may be a curia or a small body, but ultimately it's the will of the bishop that prevails. So, the fact that even today church life is imagined according to the metaphor of the kingdom of God, which was valid 2000 years ago, even today, when circumstances have changed and changed so dramatically, shows the problem of the antiquated mindset being imported as it is from ancient days into the present context. Everything about us has changed. Only one thing doesn't change, and that's the realm of religion. And this is a shame. So you have the absolute anathema, the monstrous contradiction, the terrible anomaly, if you like, of bishops, archbishops, cardinals, etc. in the Catholic Church, and of course, bishops and metropolitans and moderators, so on and so forth, in other denominations, conducting themselves exactly as monarchs conducted in the past. And if a monarch is sovereign, the people belong to him. Please understand, it's a very serious issue. The people belong to the sovereign, and not that the sovereign belongs to the king. But if the people are sovereign, as in a democracy, then the ruler belongs to the people and not the other way around. It's a very serious distinction. It's a distinction of immense practical consequence. Now, for example, in the Indian context, when the Prime Minister of India, perhaps not knowing this historical background, keeps repeating these words, my 140 people, mere 140 crore logon. He's actually, perhaps he does not know this, he's speaking like a monarch and he's not speaking like a democrat. If he's a true democrat and he wants to be faithful in letter and spirit to the paradigm of democracy, he has to say, the 140 crores of Indians to whom I belong, whose first servant I am. And I'm sure he's aware of this because in the run up to the 2014 election, that was how he cast himself. He said, I will be the first servant of the interests of the people. That he didn't say my people, never, not even once. You can check on this. It's after he assumed office that he began to say, my people, my people. Now, you would think that he's saying that out of love for the people, may well be, but historically speaking, as an academic, I'm telling you, that is a wrong formulation. The formulation that is harmonious with the ethos of a secular democratic republic is not my 140 crores people, but the 140 crores people whose first servant I am, whose will is supreme, and whose will determines and confers this power on me. The Prime Minister governs the country under sufferance from the will of the people. And that's the essence of democracy, government of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, I digress this much into politics in order to come back to religion very briefly, and I will not tarry any longer. Uh, Please realize that our bishops of various ranks and various colors really think they are kings, and therefore the people belong to them and not the other way around. Jesus conducted himself clearly as one who belonged to the people. He never said, my, 200,000 people or my 20,000 people. He never said that. He said, I am the good shepherd. I've come to lay down my life for you. That is the heart of a true democrat. On the other hand, if you still operate in the mindset of monarchy, you would say the people must be sacrificed for my sake. Every subject, there's no citizen under kingship, as you know, every subject has a duty, or is a duty bound to lay down his life for my sake. So Jesus turned monarchy on its head and said, I've come to lay down my life for you. That is true democracy. It's the ultimate democracy because no democracy extant on planet Earth has leaders who will measure up to this exalted standard that Jesus has normalized, where the leader lays down his life for the sake of the people. So, my dear friends, I merely want to invite you to re-examine some of these phrases which we have borrowed over and circulated unthinkingly over a period of 2000 years. The circumstances in which we are living today, the overall human condition is vastly different from what was obtained when Jesus coined this expression. And every expression has its own ethos, particularly key expressions like this. And therefore, when you perpetuate or continue to legitimize and hold on desperately to these antique formulations and phraseologies, then you're actually doing a disservice to yourself because you are legitimizing, willy-nilly legitimizing the perpetuation of monarchical principles, monarchical mindsets, and including and also monarchic way of handling power and relating to people. And that's exactly what happens and what exists in our midst. Therefore, you realize, if you have any idea as to how church life is organized, you'll realize that what I'm saying is absolutely factually correct. So I submit these reflections to your consideration and see how church life today needs to be brought into harmony with the human condition at the present time without losing its spiritual core. That's where maturity lies. More of that maybe on another occasion. For the time being, goodbye, and may all blessings come richly upon you. Thank you.